a little bit of background for some of the listeners. I originally met your brother Michael when I started working at a gym. He was a PT there, and we became instant friends despite our massive age gap. And all along, he's had a brother James that was involved in martial arts that I only met you later on. But you and I met, and we pretty much instinctively clicked straight away. And I remember looking, and number one, I was always amazed by your energy. You have this really calm, confident energy. The question I have for you, though, is that how you feel all the time?
Not necessarily. There's many days where I feel lethargic and tired. I think 80% of the time I'm not motivated to even work out, but I always end up working out. So I think it's that reinforcement and that perseverance, that tenacity to just keep going. And that's really, I think, the driver that I always feel better after a workout. And I think the initial start of working out can be the hardest, but I think once you do get started, you feel so much better.
So would you say that's something that you develop through practice? When you meet new people, you just present yourself confidently and securely, but that's come from practice of actually having to force yourself into situations you didn't feel like being in?
Yes, 100%. I consider myself more of an introverted person than extroverted, and I think over the years, because I was in the fitness industry, it very much forced me to become more of an extroverted person. And I was able to connect to people on an emotional level. And I really thought at the time that if something scares me, then I should do it. And I was
I like that.
very much apprehensive to talk to people and gauge on their personality and how they kind of articulate themselves, and I'd learn and watch, and that was sort of the driver, because I think initially I was very much an introverted person.
Well, I'd have to say, when I first met you, I tend to think I'm a good judge of character. I've made lots of mistakes thinking that, but when I first met you, I did see you as a watcher. Like you seemed introverted, but you seemed confident. And I wouldn't use the word introverted. I would use the word calculated. You like to watch, you like to observe, you like to see the flow of things, the way people behave, how they interact, the words they use. And I know that's probably something that just comes with practice. But with your martial arts background, everyone's nervous to get in the ring. Everyone's nervous to do something physical, especially if it's a competitive sport. So do you think that being involved in martial arts actually helped you develop that sort of skill that encouraged you to do things that you were afraid of doing?
100%. I think martial arts to me has really helped me so much in life. I always say anything good that has happened in my life is through the result of practicing martial arts. And it's not just the fitness and the strength and flexibility that you gain as well. It's the mindset. It builds that warrior mindset, that
Yeah,
mentality, to be
yeah.
able to harness and utilize that as a tool to push through adversity and overcome plateaus and obstacles. And I think martial arts really is a tool for me to really just not so much become more proficient in fighting, but it's that warrior mentality to be able to push and excel and overcome, and become more resilient. And it's been a massive help for me in my life.
Well, I'd have like mate. It's interesting you said, because I heard your podcast with Richard Norton that's up on Spotify. Fabulous podcast, by the way. Loved it, and he
Thank you,
talked
man.
very candidly and shared some insights. Now, for those who don't know, Richard Norton is a famous Australian martial artist that actually went overseas and did well and worked with Jackie Chan. So a lot of the younger generations don't know about this, but not just Jackie Chan, Chuck Norris, and a lot of the big names. So he said the same thing on the podcast, that anything good in his life comes from martial arts. I can say, like, from my own personal experience with my tumors and things like that, that I attribute all of my success in surviving that from my martial arts background. So everything came from there. And you touched something on very specific. It's the lessons you learned in martial arts, not just from a physical point of view, but a character development with the warrior mindset that you're talking about. Now, in order to understand that a little bit better, give us a brief history about your martial arts and how long you've been into. I know that you're a BJJ black belt, which is no easy feat. So share us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I started martial arts when I was about 6. So my first introduction was Taekwondo. So mum enrolled me into my first Taekwondo school, and that progressed into other striking arts. So I got awarded a second degree black belt in Taekwondo, and
Wow.
then I branched off into Muay Thai, and I dabbled a little bit in Thai boxing. And I think with Taekwondo, you tend to use a lot more your legs. And when I first started Muay Thai, that was a bit of a humbling experience because it was the first time that I was experiencing being punched in the face.
Yeah.
So with Taekwondo, there's no punches to the face. There's only kicks and punches to the body and kicks to the head.
Yes.
So punches to the head was something new. So I'm like, wow, this is really something that I have to really kind of delve into and identify. It's identified a weakness for me. So I did Muay Thai for a few years, and then I also did karate, which is the Bushikai, which was
Yep.
under Malcolm Anderson. He was
Yep.
under Bob Jones,
Yep. Yep.
Zendo Kai.
Zenkai. Yep.
Zendo Kai.
Yeah.
So I got to a first degree black belt in that.
Wow.
And that was that was a good introduction as well because it was more of a mixed
Yeah,
martial
it
arts.
kind of brings
But
the two together a little bit.
yeah, so it still integrates the karate and the katas that you learn, but it also has aspects from other styles. And that's really kind of the turning point where it really opened my eyes to grappling arts.
Yep.
And while I was doing karate, I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And for those that don't know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was a grappling art that was I think the first awakening in 1993 when Hoist Gracie just defeated giants. You know,
Yeah,
he had a
in the
70,
original UFC.
you had a 70 kilogram Brazilian just defeat giants
Yeah,
that were,
I've seen that.
kilograms heavier than he was. It's pretty remarkable. And it was very much an eye opener for me that someone could strangle me that was smaller than me, weaker than me, and use just technique and leverage. And that was very, very humbling.
And
And
gentle art, right?
it's a gentle art. It's a gentle art. And that was a very interesting experience. And that opened up a lot more doors for me as well. So I got awarded my black belt in BJJ in 2019.
Wow, mate. That's incredible because most people are chasing their black belt journey, but in BJJ, it's definitely one of those that it's long term, it's experience. There's really no rush, right? The more you learn, the better black belt you'll be.
I think, the time frame that it takes to get awarded a jiu-jitsu black belt, you're looking at between 10 to 15 years
Yep.
to get a
Wow.
jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yep.
So it took me 10 years to get jiu-jitsu black belt, but very different from other striking arts. With the previous black belts that I got awarded, it did take a long time, but not nearly as long as BJJ. And it was very, very humbling. I just remember my first introduction, I rolled with a high-level female blue belt, and she ragdolled the fuck out of me. Just
Very humbling, man.
yeah, just very humbling. But it was very much an eye-opener. But dabbling in BJJ brought into other things as well. Teaching the art.
Well, mate, it's interesting. It's like I listened to your journey, and there's a lot of similarities between ours. And my background in karate was actually with shukukai, which means way for all. Slightly different, but the original background of that comes from Shitoryu. And our style, meaning way for all, was actually developed by Sensei Tani, who opened up a school and put Kimura Sensei in charge. And the whole thing was to amalgamate the different arts and kind of work it from a technical basis. So the traditional karate that we were aware of was also very rigid in some ways. So this allowed a little bit more fluidity and adaptation, even from Japanese jiu-jitsu, which is slightly different to Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But the foundation tends to be the same. And I never forget, we used to have this young girl, and she was a black belt, and we were just white belts, and she was teaching a class. She was tiny as, and there was these two older men that refused to take the class or attend the class because she was teaching. And when she came in, the head instructor arrived. He noticed that they were sitting out, and when he asked why they were sitting out, she explained. And then we made a ring, and she said, "All right, 2 against 1," and she absolutely annihilated both guys. I mean, today's day and age, that might not happen, but back in the day, you'd see, understand that with the evolvement of sport, there has been a little bit of the loss of the traditional values of martial arts because there's a big difference between sport karate and actual combat karate. And I'd say the same thing applies between judo and jiu-jitsu and things like that, but they're all equally effective. But to me, there's a common denominator in all of these arts. It seems to still be based on character and respect and self-awareness. So every time I see, I'm getting close to my 50s, and if I have to see my instructor today, I still feel like a 15-year-old. I don't feel weak. I don't feel ashamed, but my respect for him is if I'm 15. I will carry his bags for him, open his door for him, because there's this understanding that they've dedicated their lifetime to an art and they are sharing that information with you. And that is way more valuable than the fee that you pay to attend the class. But do you think that this is something that society has lost? When you come into like a presentation of personal trainers or other people offering a service, it becomes more about the dollar value as opposed to sharing their personal journeys.
Yeah, 100%. I think just with the way the world has evolved now, I think there is that tendency for people that are, very much an online personality. There isn't that so much respect. There are a lot of fake people. And I think the one thing that really is resonating with, learning about you too is obviously you've dabbled in martial arts as well, but that respect is there. And I think it is very much something that I think you emulate not just in martial arts, but in the real world.
Yes.
You carry that with you. You're respectful, you're courteous towards others, you're uplifting, you show empathy, kindness, benevolence. And these are all things that I think martial arts builds that through the years and years of training. And it embodies that respect. And I 100% think that's what's lacking in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like like all those words you use, most people would look at that as soft and calming, and then if we behaved any other way, it would be seen as toxic. But the one thing about martial arts that I feel it teaches us to be weapons, to be warriors, and to understand what it is to be a warrior. And I think we all have that innate ability to be a warrior, but there comes with that fear factor, and that fear factor has to be accepted. And I believe it's fear in a reactive moment that causes us to burst out and do the wrong things. So even though we are empathetic and kind, we can also be defensive and protective. There is that switch, but when that switch happens, it's still calm and calculated. It's not just like we've lost our control and go crazy. So if you had to see two people walk into a ring and they beat it out, they have their fight, and at the end of it, there's always this respect. And would you say, what are your thoughts when it comes to relationships or people fighting amongst themselves out in the street from a reactive process? It seems like there never reaches a resolution. So what would be the difference between an argument with your spouse or a roll on the mat with one of your peers?
That's a really good question. And I like the way you said that, with regards to respect in the ring and respect that you show others. It's interesting. Some of the kindest and gentle people I've met in my life are trained killers.
Yep.
And that respect is there. It's there regardless, but they really are such nice, kind people. And when you have that reassurance and that capability that you know how to defend yourself,
Yep.
you're able to carry that with you and apply the tools to be able to work through different problems and situations that might be
Yes.
happening, whether it be a relationship with your spouse that's, a disagreement, or if you're having a little bit of a hard time with your boss at work, things like that.
Good point.
Martial arts really is the vehicle for human potential. It just helps with everything that you do. And I think that respect that you see when you watch like a UFC bout and they punched on and after the referee has called it, that respect is there. You see them, raising each other's hands.
Yes.
And it's very, very interesting when you're in a whole room full of jiu-jitsu black belts.
Yep.
There's that respect,
Well,
and it's very, very, very humbling.
you actually touched on something there that I quite like, and it just brought something that I've often considered, is that nowadays in society, especially with Instagram and things, we tend to be looking for the respect or the admiration of people in general, people that we don't even know. But if someone had to behave inappropriately in a UFC bout or jiu-jitsu bout and show a sign of disrespect, one thing I've noticed it's that it's the immediate peers that have an issue with that because it's kind of a self-reflectant. So one thing I've noticed in martial arts, we strive more to get the respect of our mentors and our peers than we do of people that aren't involved. And do you think that in society, that's something that people want to do, that they're just more interested in what strangers think of them as opposed to what their colleagues and mentors think of them?
Yeah, I think sometimes even too, we're also our own worst critic. We
True.
really do. Yeah, we really do not just seek the approval of our peers and our co-workers, but sometimes even we do give criticism in ourselves, and that can sometimes be the detriment that I think a lot of people really struggle with because it's something that I think is in us. We want to feel validated, we want to feel important, we want to feel useful. We want that respect, and yeah, it can sometimes be quite challenging.
But do you think that respect obviously is something that is earned, but at the same time, it's something that's given? So when you walk into a ring and you know that you're against somebody who's better than you have this respect for them. In martial arts, the way you earn that senior's respect is by approaching the situation with everything that you have, giving and offering your whole, being mindful of that moment and having your full attention in that moment to get everything you can from the senior that's about to roll with you and not give up. Learn the lesson that you're there to learn. And that in itself gains respect. And like you said, surviving that, you walk away, even though you may have lost, the fact is they respect your determination, they respect your overcoming of the fear, and that then gives us a sense of self-respect too. But in
Yes.
society, I see people aren't very concerned about what their partners or their bosses or their colleagues do as much as they're concerned of strangers having an opinion of themselves. Do you think that's something that's quite
Yes.
evident in society today?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I do. I think that, yeah, you nailed it. I think people do generally think that of what their co-workers think of them, and with their relationships and their spouse, and I think that definitely crosses over in that as well.
Friends and family think they just want to do it because they're looking for validation from strangers. And that in itself can be a slippery slope, not on Instagram, but in losing yourself searching for validation from strangers as opposed to trying to find that validation from people. And no one's saying you need to stop being who you are. But sharing something on Instagram in order to get likes or promote yourself or even just sharing, part of that is remembering that there's people that are close to you that you want to impress as well with the exact same post, as opposed to saying, well, this is not about you, this is all about me. And in martial arts, it's never like that. It's even if you're a lower grade, you always have something to offer, which is what we've learned. So doing these martial arts, do you think that that will have a big impact also in how men behave nowadays when with regards to toxic masculinity? Because one thing I've seen, especially talking to my son, is that men tend to be a little bit more reserved when it comes to being affirmative in their conversations with women they don't know or women that they're attracted to, or even just general people that they're interested in. So they kind of hold back with that. They don't have that assertiveness.
I think one of the biggest detriments to society is the phrase toxic masculinity,
Oh,
and I
yeah,
think there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There are toxic people, but there's no such thing as
I
toxic
agree.
masculinity. I think if you look at what's happening in the world right now, I think there is more so the importance of raising young men to be strong and capable. And when people obviously understand from an outside perspective, if you're thinking about like war-torn countries and fighting for what's real, you need strong masculine men. You need men in the front line. And I think that society is pushing a narrative to say that being masculine is toxic, it's wrong, and that you should be more feminine. Quite the opposite. I think people that are masculine and people that are strong, they're not going to hurt people. Instead, they're actually going to be protection
I
to
agree.
society. They're going to be protectors. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. I mean, you look at the mass shootings that happen in
Oh,
America, we know who they are. Unfortunately, it's weak men that do these horrible things, whereas men that are sure of themselves and I think have that capability of violence, but then learn how to control it is better for society. Jordan Peterson, I think, said this best. He said, a harmless man is not a good man. A dangerous man is a good man, but has it under voluntary control. And I
yeah,
think this is one of the things that martial arts instills is you have the capability of violence, but you also have the capability of being gentle and you learn how to control that. It's that Japanese saying, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener
gardener,
in a war.
mate. That's one of my favorite sayings. And I think you touched on something quite important there as well when you mentioned about men being able to be defensive of themselves and being aggressive when they need to be and protectors when they need to be. But I think that also comes from, especially being involved in martial arts, from the constant practice of having to face our demons in certain situations. So going to a tournament, having a bout, rolling with a senior guy, you have those fear come up and learn to control those emotions so that you can calm your brain and still perform adequately, as well as situations where often we've all had that experience where we've rolled with somebody who's allowed their ego to get the better of them. And we're all a little bit human. And then we find ourselves in that situation of trying to control our temperament, our anger, our frustration, because we can't allow that ego to overcome us and lose ourselves in the same process. So I think martial arts for me taught me how to be aware of my emotions. But the best part, it created a safe environment for my peers as well as my instructor to call me out with what I needed to work on and me not taking offense to it. And I think that's something in society that's lacking today. And if someone had to say to me, is it more important for men or women to do martial arts? I would argue that it's equally important. Most people would
Yes.
think that it's, women need to learn to defend themselves, especially with today's day and age and crime. But at the same time, from a woman's perspective, I would think it would give them the environment to understand their emotions, understand how their body can go into a flight or fight mode, but still have cognitive control over yourself in those moments.
Yeah.
And
It's it's voluntary adversity. I think the one thing that's an eye opener with anyone that trains in martial arts, it's dealing with adversity on the mat, but also off the mat. It prepares you for life. And there are many instances where I've been in a situation where I might be sparring or wrestling with a high level black belt. You're dealing with adversity on the mat day in, day out, and that prepares you for life.
yeah.
And it really is that tool to build that resiliency.
So, can you give us an example of something that you've done in your martial arts that was quite challenging, that you learned how to control, and how did you apply that in the real life?
Yeah, so the lessons that you can take away from martial arts, to me is the ability to be able to, one, learn how to defend yourself, but then also be able to harness the life lessons that martial arts provide to add in the real world. So sometimes you might have an episode with your boss in the workforce, or there might be a situation you're happening with a friend. You're trying to sort of figure out how to tackle that problem. And it's analyzing the problem at hand and figuring out what the best solution is. And it's the same thing that you apply in martial arts. So if we're talking about jiu-jitsu and wrestling, I'm wrestling with somebody. The goal is to try and get submission, where I work my way through a hierarchy of pins, work my way to a pin where I can hold them down and then eventually submit them, whether it be rendering them with a choke or an arm lock. That same pattern or that same process that I applied is similarly how we apply that to life. So if you're very much needing to address something at work, someone's upset you in work, you can analyze and navigate your way through it, the hierarchy of steps, similar to how you apply that on the mat. You apply that into life as well. And then you can come at it from a different angle. And there's obviously no right or wrong answer, but jiu-jitsu and any sort of martial art you practice gives you the tools to be able to apply that in a manner that will probably give you the best outcome.
Yeah, I think it also gives you the initiative to do that. Like my daughter, she did martial arts and she's done karate, BJJ, as well as Muay Thai. But she stopped in the last 2 years or so. And she's having a problem at her current job. And the way the managers are behaving with her, slightly unprofessional as part of the whole thing. But we navigated and she stood her ground in a very calm and respectful manner. But the one thing that I saw that she was doing was, I'm not happy here. I'm going to look for another job. And my advice to her was like, sweetie, no, you need to sort this out before you find another job. I can't change people. No, but you can change yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to go to the other job and you're going to hit the same obstacle. So you almost have to navigate a way that you can be okay, not being okay, while you search for an amicable solution. And I think that's the one thing about martial arts is when you were talking about rolling and your goal is to submit the person. If you manage to submit that person, because all the while their goal is to try and submit you, at the end of the bout, would it be wrong for me to say that both people walk away with a win-win situation, even though one's lost?
100%. Regardless of the outcome, if you get submitted or you submit the other person, you both walk away as understanding and analyzing that the situation was a learning experience. So I think you learn much more from failure than you do your success, but you do also know, you do recognize the paths that you do, what's a way I can sort of word this? You do recognize that in success, there is also the building blocks. So, but I do think that you learn far, far more through failure and trial and error. But yeah, you're right. I think both people that walk away and have learned something because of it.
Would it be correct for me to say then that's also another good thing that you learn from being in a martial arts environment is that even if you do submit the person, you still have enough empathy to talk and navigate where they may have gone wrong, what you saw, how you felt. And that's something that's missing in today's society. If I'm having an argument with my boss and I get fired or vice versa, it seems to be very much a closed kind of end of the story deal. There's no one really discussing afterwards, okay, we've reached our solution. How can we navigate this better next time around? It seems to just be closed-ended. So even if we win, we still don't show the empathy for the person who's lost, where in martial arts, it's completely different. And what are your thoughts with the saying that you are only as good as the people you spar with?
It's interesting, yeah. I think there's always lessons to learn. There's always mountains to climb. And, you get your good days, you get your bad days. There's always going to be someone better than you. And there's always something that you can learn from people that are less skilled than you. And I think that regardless of your surroundings and where you are in your journey in martial arts, it's a never-ending process.
Yeah,
You're always striving to learn. Once I got jiu-jitsu black belt, I had to empty my cup and learn again.
yeah.
And you never stop learning. You never stop growing.
I personally, when I was about, I think I was a second dan black belt, and I was offered to do an Uchideshi program, which is a live-in student program. We train 6 days a week, train 6 hours a day, as well as run classes, and on top of that, live our lives. But our whole job was to live in the dojo, eat, sleep, and clean. But when we started the Uchideshi program, there was no rank. We all get demoted right back to wipeout. And there were a couple of guys that was, interestingly enough, a bit challenging for them because they had worked so hard to get to where they were. Even though the opportunity that they had been offered is a very unique and rare opportunity and you have to be selected. I, on the other hand, found a big sense of relief going back to an empty cup because over the years, I always felt less pressure with an empty cup. I didn't have to prove myself. I could just be a student. And I think that's the one thing that I've learned. And I have to touch back on your podcast with Richard Norton. Always be a student.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Always be a student means that the moment you stop learning, you stop growing. And we either learn or we fail. And you'll continually make the same mistake over and over again until you learn the lesson. And I think progress is the key. And I think we have to strive that there's always a better version of ourselves. We can always get to that stage where we can become that 1% better every day. And this is the key to life. I think progression in not just your mind and your body, but also spirituality as well. It's learning about yourself. I'm 37 years of age. I'm still learning more and more about myself.
Yeah.
And you never stop learning, and always be open-minded, willing to learn from other people, always be humble and take lessons where you can and learn what you can do better next time and how you can, really just, use that to make a positive impact and add something.
Well, I'd have to say that's also something that's quite important for me when it comes to the reality of the importance of being in martial arts, is that it teaches you to always be willing to learn, always grow. And then it becomes innate because I'm sure it's like that for you as well, where you're always searching for more knowledge. It doesn't matter how much you get, the more you get. Like my dad used to say, the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know.
Yeah.
So you're just constantly chasing. And unfortunately, I do think, especially in today's society, in the academic system, everyone's reaching this target. If you get this degree, you know everything. If you get this qualification, you're good at that. It kind of like stifles people. So I do find, especially in the younger generations, they don't seem to be pushing themselves into uncomfortable situations that causes them to grow. Would you say that that's a big problem that they have today in the decline of relationships amongst people?
100%. I think struggle and going through adversity is where the lessons lie. And I think you have to analyze the situation or where you
I think
are.
you've just paused on me for a sec, mate.
How's it go?
There you go. Go again.
Yeah. What was the question you asked again?
So basically, is it a decline in society that people aren't willing to learn? They're not putting themselves in uncomfortable situations to learn from another. So relationships, to me, seem to be detrimental for that because people see arguments or discussions as conflict, but they're really opportunities to learn. And in martial arts, we're constantly searching for that. I believe that seems to be a negative impact of not being in martial arts in today's society.
Yeah, I think we run away from pain and we run towards pleasure. And I think martial arts builds that character in you to be able to withstand problems that may arise. And I think a lot of people would benefit from training in martial arts because they could really, help them tackle and overcome certain situations that might arise, whether it be family, relationship stress, financial stress, emotional
And
stress,
not become
and
avoidant, right?
not become avoidant. And I think understand that, choosing not to learn is arrogant, and some of the greatest lessons will come through being humble and learning and diving into more of what you don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like choosing not to learn can sometimes come from a fear-based perspective, meaning I don't want to learn that because I'm afraid I won't be good enough, or I'm afraid I won't understand it, or I'm afraid that I'll be seen less than. So people tend to be resistant to that. And I think personally, it's because they haven't put themselves in that environment that the simple fact that you're open to learning actually makes you more, what's pliable, makes you richer. It makes your opportunities never ending. Whereas if you're afraid of that, you're always going to be closed off. And in a relationship, when people avoid discussions with their partner or they see a discussion as conflict, I take it as in someone who's fearful avoids conflict until they get cornered in in the side of a lift or in the alleyway. And then that fear manifests itself into a reactive process rather than a proactive process. No different to an argument where couples tend to avoid the situation, no one addresses the elephant in the room, and then sooner or later, one of the parties feels locked into a corner, isn't able to handle it, and just spews all this negative thing on the person that they say they care about. And that's where they've lost themselves and become reactive. And I think that's one thing that martial arts forces you to constantly address when you're putting yourself in these situations. What are your thoughts on
Yes,
that?
100% agree with you. Yeah, I definitely think that, yeah, this is one of the things that I think instills in people that train in martial arts is the ability to not walk away from discomfort, but embrace it and understand that's a stepping stone. It's a learning curve for you to become better.
So I'm going to throw a scenario at you, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this. And it's going to do a little bit because I know that you work a lot with men's mental health as well. So I noticed that men, when they interact with each other, they tend to be a little bit more forthcoming. You're able to read a man who's feeling a little bit insecure about the environment. And if you are able to read that, you can calm them down, you can talk to them. If they're aggressive, we can negotiate. But men seem to be a lot more forthcoming with each other and less reserved. But when a man has to address a woman in today's society, I sense more of a fear of toxic masculinity. So they tend to hold themselves back and often allow themselves to be what I call punching bag, emotional punching bags. Even though they may have this sort of sensation that they come from a strong, confident environment, the moment they give their heart to someone, there's that fear of losing them. How would you
Yeah.
think? I mean, that's going from people, and I can say on personal experience, I was, I would like to say, a functional martial artist and quite uh, applicable to what I could do. I could hold my own. But yeah, when it came to the woman in my life, I found myself always being fearful and reserved because the idea that I was a martial artist often instilled in these people that I was aggressive or violent. So if I raised my voice, I was seen more stay away from him. Whereas if a stranger did, it wouldn't be the case. And along the way, I had to learn how to approach the situations. But the common denominator was I would rather avoid them as opposed to I was never scared to get into the mat and roll with somebody. What do you think is the missing link there?
I think men and women are different. Men and women really are different in the sense that how we think and how we act and move. And there is that fear, that pressure, that burden of performance that I think society puts on men. And I think we do really need to understand that men must perform on a regular basis. We have a burden of performance. There's a lot of weight on our shoulders to be that strong, masculine role or rock, I should say, and be that strong presence in a woman's life. And it's interesting, the term male vulnerability gets pushed around on the internet. And I had a dating and relationships coach come on my podcast, and we were talking about male vulnerability. And one of the things that's been, passing around on the internet is never cry in front of your girlfriend. Never show a woman any vulnerability whatsoever, because she'll lose attraction for you and she'll leave you. And I'm not saying that men should be whining and complaining all the time. It's just there are times when it is acceptable to be vulnerable. And I think it can sometimes be very difficult for a man to open up to a woman, especially I think if we're talking about a death in the family. And unfortunately, there has been many incidences online where men have shown vulnerability in front of their partner, and then a month or so later, it's been weaponized and used against them in a future argument. Something that was so sacred, something that was so confidential, and yet was thrown back in his face, it gets used against him. And this is the big problem, I think, right now, is there is still that stigma that comes with male vulnerability and even mental health. I think men really, really struggle with, I guess, articulating their words and having a safe space if they are in a committed relationship to be able to talk through their problems in a healthy way. And it's a very difficult position that I think sometimes men can grapple with is, they've been with their partner for, say, 2 or 3 years, and they're having a difficult time, whether it be the stress of life, and they don't know how to openly express that to their partner. And showing vulnerability, I think, is not a sign of weakness. I think being vulnerable is a sign of strength.
I'd agree.
And I think this is the problem, I think, right now is men really, really struggle. We really do.
I think if a man is vulnerable with his partner, he's showing that he's strong enough and he's willing to trust her with it. And that, to me, there's no higher compliment that you can actually give a woman. The fact that you're saying, I need you to help me take care of myself. You're not saying, I want you to help me and take care of me. You're saying, I'm struggling, I'm being vulnerable, I need support to help, just as we would with our friends. But I also think that when women use that against a man, it's coming from a place of ego and fear. It's because for example, in martial arts, we can roll. If you're about to choke me out, it's illegal for me to grab you by the nuts and rip. It's illegal for me to poke your eye out, because that's a panicked response. It's a panic response because I'm afraid. There's fear in, is he going to hurt me? Is he going to choke me out? I panic and I do that. So sometimes I question that a woman who's in that situation and throws something that's vulnerable against her man, sometimes, not that it's okay, but do you think that comes from a place of her not being comfortable in that environment? So she gets reactive?
Yeah, and Sean, who I interviewed, was the relationships and dating coach. He really articulated it well. He said that situations where men have been vulnerable in front of their woman and has been used against him in a heated argument, he says could be emotionally immature or insecure. And she probably hasn't had a masculine role model in her life to show her or to guide her in understanding male vulnerability. And I think women do struggle with this because I think society says, well, look at this, for example. Women have a support system. They're able to to talk with their friends and converse with each other. If they have a problem, they can, work it
Right.
out.
Yep.
Men, it's a little bit different. We struggle to open up because we constantly worry and we're apprehensive about not just opening up in front of our partner. We worry about what society will think of us.
Yes.
And it's a sad, unfortunate reality, but men commit suicide 3 times higher than women. And I
Yep.
think men are suffering. They really are. And I think this is what's lacking in the world right now is men need men of course need to show respect towards women, but I also think women need to show more compassion and empathy towards men because we need each other.
I agree with you 100%. And when people talk to me about men and women are equal, my argument is no, we're not. The only thing we're equal in is we are equal in value. Because it doesn't matter what your role is, you have a valuable role. Not one is more important than the other. The two have to coexist. You can't roll on the mat by yourself. Sure, you can practice certain drills and get your conditioning up, but you learn when you're rolling with somebody else. And at the time, you are both equal, no matter what your grade or your experience levels are. In that match, you are equal fighters, period. And you both learn from each other.
I should also add too, Peds, the women who are listening to this, I think, can really benefit. A good example is if you look at Conor McGregor, if you look at his wife, Dee Devlin, she was with him from the ground up when he had nothing. And now look at him. He's 2-time UFC champion. The right woman by a man's side and that support system that guides him through tough times and helps him through that. Watch that man build an empire.
Mate,
It really is a superpower that women have.
it gives us a sense of
That
purpose too, because men
yeah,
live for
yeah.
purpose, right? And when we have that sense of purpose, we become unstoppable. I mean, I've seen men that are just gangster, man. They are entrepreneurs. They make money. They grind, and you think they've got it made, and they can't get any better. And then they find that one woman that just brings that passion out in them, and they become even more unstoppable. But I tend to agree with everything you said, mate. And I do want to touch on before we go get off. We spoke about male suicide. And I would like to have you back on in some future episodes and discuss that a little bit more in depth because I know that you've had your fair share challenges with the thought of suicide and dealing with those emotions and severe depression. Just really briefly, I'm assuming that you've been training in martial arts and still felt those emotions.
Yeah, yeah, one definitely. It it's a constant battle, with the mind, and I think martial arts was something that really was a tool for me to work through those difficult stages in my life. And yeah, we all go through hard times. We all go through adversity. We do hit rock bottom. And I think for me, the martial arts really was that it helped me through it. Because I was so used to facing adversity on the mat, it was able to give me the tools to be able to work through my own personal problems. And this I think also is extremely important that we can instill in our children, especially, raising our young boys,
Yeah.
the guidance and the tools and what in martial arts, teaches has a profound impact on how to work through adversity and overcome obstacles.
No, mate, I think that's definitely going to be in the future for us. I'd love to sit down and talk to you more about that and share my personal experience because I know with me, the reasons and even just the story I told myself to make it make sense to me. I find that it's a very interesting dynamic that most people don't understand what goes through a man's mind when he's at that point and what it took to get him at that point. And if you'd be happy to, mate, I'd love to have you back on and discuss that at a more intimate level. Mate, you've been fantastic. I'm going to end this on a high note. So just quickly before you get off, how do people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on all social media platforms, Facebook, James Nunn, Instagram, Unleashed Jiu-Jitsu. I'm also on TikTok, Unleashed Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm on Rumble and starting up a YouTube account as well.
Fantastic. So, and if someone was looking for private lessons in martial arts or even just training and diet programs, do they just find you through those links?
Yeah, so you can message me through Facebook or Instagram,
Yep,
and
fantastic.
yeah,
And just to stand, making sure I've got this right, you don't just teach martial arts, you teach the character involved in martial arts.
yeah. So my forte is specifically self-defense. So a lot of my students come from domestic violence, sexual assault,
Yep.
so real world combat, and yeah. So my sort of approach is instilling self-defense, but also it's the life lessons that martial arts brings as well.
Fantastic, mate. Mate, it's been an honor having you on. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'll make sure that it's the Unleashed podcast on Spotify.
Yes, yeah,
Fantastic. Because
no,
those little things that you mentioned, I'm going to jump back on and see some of those. Sounds fantastic. Well, thank you very
awesome.
much, mate. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Vince. Bye.